The close historic relationship between Yukon and Connecticut agriculture can best be seen in how it helped the state's poultry industry to develop.
In the 50s and 60s, really, poultry was the major agricultural industry here in Connecticut. We had the egg-laying business, and we also had a broiler business. There were small family farms. Well, many of them were started by immigrants.
Yukon researchers helped farmers find the best breeder stock for egg production with an extensive testing program.
The producers that had the best birds were the ones that were selling the birds to the public for the next year. Later on, we had broiler tests to find out which broilers are good, and that's how our acres started.
When Italian immigrant Frank Saglio left his job in 1926 as foreman of J.H. Hale's peach business, he called his new Glastonbury fruit and vegetable farm Arbor Acres. Frank's youngest son, Henry, loved to tend his family's small flock of chickens. Over time, with help from Cooperative Extension, Henry Saglio turned his passion into a successful chicken breeding operation. In 1948, Saglio won a nationwide contest sponsored by A&P supermarkets to find the best broiler breeding stock. That win laid the groundwork for Connecticut's largest agricultural business ever, with sales of $100 million a year. For more than 40 years, Arbor Acres sold as much as 80% of the world's broiler breeding stock. In 1999, Arbor Acres merged with the company that eventually moved to the south, citing the higher costs of doing business in the state. It would not be the last time that economic imperatives and regional competition would result in the loss of a huge Connecticut agriculture business. 20th century advances in farming efficiency and productivity eventually led to larger farm operations and the loss of small family farms. The state's poultry industry was transformed through consolidation as thousands of farmers went out of business by the 1980s.
The poultry industry in Connecticut since 1900 has evolved from about 4,000 poultry farms to fewer than 25 actual locations where poultry are being raised commercially. Over that time, we've seen it evolve also from a floor-raised operation to a cage operation starting in the late 50s, early 60s. The number of birds in the state, however, has remained fairly constant. 3.5 to 4 million laying hens in the state is about where we've been in the last 50 years, but consolidation into facilities. To the point today, there's really one major egg producer in the state, and that's Cough Cough Egg Farms, which is also part of a larger U.S. company called Moark with 4 million hens. We can produce 100% of the eggs for the state of Connecticut, and we actually export some eggs.
Sam Cough was one of thousands of Jewish urban residents who came to Connecticut in the late 19th and early 20th centuries to start farming. These new farmers were helped by a philanthropic organization whose mission was to give Jewish immigrants a way out of the crowded urban tenements of the day. Settling mostly on worn-out Yankee farms with rocky soil unsuitable for crops, they started dairy and egg farms and producer cooperatives, many of which thrived for several generations, helping to revitalize Connecticut agriculture. In the early 1900s, the European migration that filled Connecticut cities also transformed the countryside.
Those farms, which were extremely marginalized, were really given new life by the immigrants from Europe. They really sustained Connecticut agriculture for many years. I would say from 1900 to really the World War II period. Oftentimes there was a sort of specialization. I mean, you can go down here in Hebron and Glastonbury and find fruit farms that Italian-American families were particularly active in giving new life to. In Ashford, tremendous number of Slovaks. In parts of Hartford County, we find a lot of Polish farmers settling, becoming involved in raising potatoes and other crops.
African Americans played an important role in Connecticut agriculture from the very start.
Certainly, there was large-scale, first slave-based and then tenant farmer-based agriculture in parts of the state. But equally typical would be just African Americans who had maybe smaller holdings than their white Yankee neighbors, but they would be undertaking the same sort of agricultural life as well, either as small independent proprietors of farms or as farm laborers on other farms.
Perhaps the most distinctive state agricultural crop is tobacco, used as cigar wrappers. With the successful introduction of shade tobacco in 1901, came a need for thousands of seasonal workers. Connecticut growers met the demand over the years by hiring immigrants, Southern African Americans, and migrant contract workers in addition to local residents. In the 1950s and 60s, thousands of Puerto Rican workers were recruited to fill a labor shortage on the farms. The long hours and Spartan worker camps attracted the attention of unions, church groups, and political activists who successfully pushed for better conditions. Starting in the 1970s, tobacco farmers increasingly sold their farms for development. Today, Connecticut tobacco farms occupy about 4,000 acres, down from a peak of 30,000 in the 1920s.
My grandfather came from Poland, ended up buying the farm with his cousin, which was the home farm where I grew up. All around the world, they're growing tobacco, and tobacco is similar to ours, but they still can't get quite the same quality and taste. Otherwise, they could grow this tobacco anywhere around the world much cheaper than we can in Connecticut. Our labor rates are higher, our land costs are higher, our fixed costs are higher. In the summertime, during harvest season, there's about 125 employees. When I was a kid growing up, there were a lot of new houses and there were a lot of kids that worked on the farms in the summertime. As the economy's gotten better, now Enfield's developed into more of a sort of a retail area. Kids are working in grocery stores or the malls, or they're tied up with school programs. We've had more guys coming from Springfield, Hartford area, our local workforce that drives in on a daily basis. Predominantly, they're of Puerto Rican descent. We get some guys that are of Mexican descent, some from the Dominican Republic. We also get some guys every summer that come from Jamaica.